The day had started like any other at the Grand Central Station. People rushed past each other with tired eyes and coffee cups in hand. Businessmen in suits spoke loudly on phones. Children clung to their parents and travelers checked train schedules. The sound of rolling suitcases and footsteps echoed off the tall stone walls. Everyone had a place to be. Nobody noticed the man who walked in slowly through the main doors. He didn't look special. His beard was gray, a little messy, and his coat was too big for his body. His shoes were old and dirty, and he carried a small backpack that looked worn out. Some people gave him a quick glance, but most ignored him. He looked like someone who might be homeless, or maybe just someone lost in the crowd. What no one knew was that this man was far from poor. He was actually a billionaire. His name was Jonathan, but no one knew that here. He didn't want them to. He liked blending in sometimes, disappearing from his big world of business meetings, luxury cars, and bodyguards. He had everything a man could ask for: money, fame, even awards. But sometimes when life became too loud, too full of fake smiles and empty words, he left it all behind for a few days. He would dress simply, leave his credit cards behind, and go out into the world like an ordinary man. No one bothered him. No one asked for pictures or tried to make deals. He was free. Today was one of those days. Jonathan had taken the train from a small town earlier in the morning, wearing a second-hand coat and a cap pulled low over his face. He had no plan, just the need to escape his mansion, the cameras, the stress. As he walked through the station, he felt something old and familiar stir inside him. It was like a memory trying to wake up. Then he heard it, the faint sound of piano keys. There was a public piano placed near the waiting area. It wasn't fancy, a bit scratched, a little out of tune. People could sit and play if they wanted. Some kids tried random notes, others played famous songs. Most of the time, no one paid attention. Jonathan walked closer. A teenager was playing a pop song, smiling at his friend recording him. After a few minutes, the boy stood up and walked away. The piano was empty again. Jonathan stared at it for a moment. His heart felt tight. It had been years since he played. He used to be good, not just good, gifted. Back when he was a child, long before the money, music was his only escape. He came from a poor family. His mother cleaned houses, and his father was never around. But in the old church down the street, there was a dusty piano that no one used. That's where he learned. He taught himself. At first, just small melodies, then full songs. He would spend hours there, even skipping meals, getting lost in the music. The sound of the keys gave him peace when everything else in life was falling apart. But as he grew older, life pulled him in other directions. He had to work, earn, survive. Business became his new obsession. He succeeded. He won. But he lost music somewhere along the way. Now, standing in the busy train station, he felt that old pull again. Slowly, he walked over to the piano and sat down. People walked past him, not caring who he was or what he was doing. A child nearby pointed at him, but the mother pulled the child along, not wanting to stop. A security guard looked in his direction, then turned away. To them, he was just another man wasting time on a public piano. He placed his hands on the keys. He felt cold. He pressed one, then another. It was off-key. He smiled to himself. Then he closed his eyes and began to play. At first the notes were slow, unsure. His fingers trembled slightly. But then muscle memory returned. His hands began to move with more confidence, shaping a melody that had lived inside him for years. It wasn't a song from the radio or anything people would instantly recognize. It was something he wrote himself a long time ago in that quiet church. When he was just a skinny boy with no money but a heart full of sound, the melody was soft and full of emotion. It started slow, almost like a whisper. Then it rose and fell, like a wave carrying memories. He remembered his mother's face, tired but loving. He remembered eating cold dinners alone. He remembered sitting at the piano, hoping someday life would be better. Every note he played now carried those memories, like invisible words written in music. A few people started to slow down. One woman walking with shopping bags stopped nearby, tilting her head. A little boy sat cross-legged on the floor, staring. A man with headphones took them off and looked around. The melody was pulling them in without them realizing it. Jonathan didn't see any of it. He was lost in the music. His fingers moved as if they had a life of their own. The pain, the struggle, the small joys, all of it was pouring out now. The sound filled the air, gentle but powerful. Didn't need lyrics. It spoke in feelings. The station, usually full of noise, began to grow quieter around the piano. People started to gather, some standing, others sitting. A few held up phones to record, but most of them just watched. There was something about this man, the way he played, the rawness of the music. It made them stop and feel something they didn't expect on an ordinary day. He kept playing. The song flowed like a story, full of sadness, hope, and a kind of beauty that comes from truth. One old man near the back wiped his eyes with a handkerchief. A young couple held hands tighter. Even the security guard, who had looked away earlier now, stood still, watching quietly. Jonathan finally played the last note. It rang out, soft and clear. Then silence. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then slowly, people began to clap. It wasn't loud or wild. It was soft, warm, and real. Jonathan looked up, surprised. He had forgotten where he was. The clapping grew louder. Some people were smiling. Others had tears in their eyes. A woman near the front whispered, "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." Jonathan gave a small nod. He didn't say anything. Words felt too small right now. Someone asked him, "Are you a musician?" He just smiled and said, "Not anymore." He stood up slowly. His knees ached. He picked up his backpack and looked around once. He saw the faces moved, surprised, grateful. He didn't need to explain who he was. This moment wasn't about money or success. It was about something deeper. As he walked away, a young boy ran to the piano and started pressing random keys. The magic was gone. But something had been left behind. Something people would talk about later to friends and family, saying, "You won't believe what I saw at the station today." Jonathan left through the same doors he came in from. Disappearing into the crowd, the station returned to its usual rhythm. But for those few minutes, time had stopped. A man no one noticed had reminded everyone that beauty can come from the most unexpected places, even from a stranger in old shoes at a public piano. He didn't need applause. He didn't need recognition. What he needed was that feeling. That peace he had once known as a child, alone with a piano. And for a short while, he found it again. Jonathan sat at the piano bench, his hands resting gently on the keys. Around him, the noise of the station continued. Announcements echoed from loudspeakers. Heels clicked on the floor. Conversations blended into a low hum. But inside him, something had gone still. Something deep, as if time itself had stopped for a few seconds. The piano in front of him was slightly out of tune. One of the black keys stuck a little, but it didn't matter. He wasn't here to impress anyone. He wasn't here to prove anything. He just wanted to feel the music again, real music. Not the kind played on perfect instruments in perfect concert halls, but the kind that came from the soul. The kind he hadn't touched in years. He gently pressed a key, gave a soft note. Then another. Slowly, he let his fingers fall into a rhythm. A quiet melody began to form, like the beginning of a story. The first few notes were uncertain, almost shy. But then they started to grow stronger, as if the piano itself recognized the hands that were playing it. Nobody noticed at first. People walked past him as they always did. A young man glanced in his direction, then kept scrolling on his phone. A woman with a red suitcase hurried by without looking. The world around him was too busy to care. But the music kept growing. He began to play a piece that came from long ago, a tune he had created as a teenager when he was poor and full of dreams. It wasn't famous. It wasn't popular. But it was powerful. It was full of memory. Every note carried a piece of his past. The nights he went hungry, the days he sat alone, the times he believed in something bigger, even when there was nothing. Around him, but silence. The melody rose and fell like the sound of wind passing through trees. His fingers moved faster now, gaining confidence. He didn't look up. He didn't need to. He was back in that small church with the broken piano, back in the place where music was his only friend, his only voice. Some people began to notice. A small boy, maybe 6 or 7, stood still a few steps away, holding his mother's hand. The boy looked at Jonathan with wide eyes. He didn't say anything. He just listened. The mother started to pull him along, but then she stopped too. It's her. Eyes moved to the piano. Something in the sound made her pause nearby. An old man with a cane sat on a bench. He had been reading a newspaper but lowered it slowly when the music touched his ears. He turned toward the piano and listened, his face full of age and stories. Softened, his eyes became glassy. One by one, people started to slow down. Jonathan still didn't look up. He was lost in the music completely. His hands moved without thought, guided by emotion. The song became stronger, deeper, like it was pouring from somewhere beyond the physical world. The sound didn't just fill the station, it filled the people around him. A young girl with headphones stopped walking. She pulled one earbud out, then the other. She looked around, searching for the source of the sound. When she saw him, sitting there like a quiet shadow, she stood still and listened. A street cleaner nearby turned off his machine for a moment and leaned on his broom. A businessman walking with his phone paused mid-call. He lowered the device and stared at the pianist like he was seeing something strange and beautiful. More people gathered now. A circle began to form slowly. They didn't cheer or clap. They just stood there, connected by the invisible thread of the melody. The notes changed. Jonathan began playing a softer part of the song, something gentle and emotional. It felt like a whisper between two old friends. It felt like a memory of a lost love or a goodbye that never got said. It spoke to the heart in a way words could not. Tears formed in the eyes of an elderly woman near the back of the group. She wasn't sure why. The song reminded her of something, maybe her late husband, maybe a dance they once shared. Didn't know. But the music opened a place inside her that had been closed for years. A child sat cross-legged on the floor, completely still. His parents didn't pull him away, they just stood behind him, watching. The father's hand rested gently on the mother's shoulder. Jonathan kept playing, not seeing any of this. He was inside a different world, a quiet, sacred place made of memory, pain, and beauty. His heart was wide open now. He remembered his mother's voice, soft and tired, telling him he could be anything. He remembered the times he was bullied for being poor, the times he sat alone on school benches while others laughed. He remembered the one teacher who noticed his talent and gave him a piano book from her own shelf. He remembered playing in the dark because there was no light at home, using candles they saved for emergencies. Each memory became a note. Each feeling became a chord. The music swelled. It reached higher. The pain in it became clearer. And yet it wasn't sad. It was strong. It was hopeful. It was the sound of someone who had walked through fire and come out alive. The people in the station felt it. They didn't know who he was. They didn't know his story. But somehow, the music told them. Without words, it told them this was not just any man. This was someone who had felt things deeply, who had lived a real rough life, who had found something inside himself that was unbreakable. One young woman, standing near the front of the crowd, wiped tears from her face with the back of her hand. She had come to the station after a fight with her boyfriend. She had been planning to go back to her parents' house for a while. She felt confused, heartbroken. But now, listening to the song, she felt calmer. The pain in her chest didn't disappear, but it softened. She felt understood, like someone had played her feelings out loud. The station, usually full of motion and noise, had become quiet. All around the piano, silence fell like a blanket. Even the sounds of trains arriving seemed distant. People spoke in whispers, if at all. Their eyes stayed on the man and the piano. Jonathan's fingers danced now. He played with everything he had, played like he was giving away pieces of himself with every note. The music reached a point where even he didn't know what was coming next. It just flowed from him like water from a spring. He felt something strange happening inside. A warmth, a peace, maybe even joy. It was the feeling he had lost over the years, the one that had once made him fall in love with music before life became about numbers, stocks, and deals. He remembered now why he used to sit for hours at that broken piano in the church. It was never about becoming great. It was never about success. It was always about healing. It's about connection, about expression. And now, for the first time in decades, he felt that again. A man took off his hat in respect. A group of teenagers nearby whispered to each other, then fell silent. Someone recorded a video, but even the camera didn't capture the full feeling of what was happening. It was like a spell had been cast, a moment where everyone in that space felt a little more human, a little more alive. Jonathan began to slow the music down now. His hands moved into the final notes. The melody softened, like a gentle goodbye. Each chord was like a deep breath. The song was ending. The feeling would stay. The last note was soft, almost like a sigh. Then stillness. For a moment. No one moved. Jonathan lifted his hands from the piano and let them rest in his lap. He took a deep breath. Didn't want to look up yet. He didn't know what he would see. Not that it mattered. He hadn't played for anyone. He had played for himself. Then slowly, the silence broke. Clapping, soft at first, then louder. People began to smile. Few were still wiping tears. Some just nodded, their hearts too full to speak. The sound of applause filled the station. Not loud like a concert hall, but warm like a fire on a cold night. Jonathan looked up finally. He saw the crowd. Their eyes were kind. Their faces were open. And for the first time in a long time, he felt truly seen. Not as a billionaire, not as a businessman, but as a person. He gave a small nod and stood up. His knees were stiff. He placed one hand gently on the piano as if thanking it. Then he turned and stepped away. As he walked, the people slowly made space. No one stopped him. No one grabbed him or asked who he was. They just watched. Some whispered, wondering who this mysterious man could be. Jonathan didn't speak. He didn't explain. He didn't need to. He had already said everything through the music. And even as the station returned to its usual busy rhythm, something had changed. Something had been shared. A moment. A feeling. A reminder that sometimes a man in an old coat sitting quietly at a piano can remind the world what it means to feel. Jonathan had not planned to play for anyone. He didn't expect a crowd or claps or attention. He just sat at the piano to feel something again. But now, as he walked away from the bench, his heart was full, not of pride, but of quiet peace. The kind of peace that comes when you speak a truth you've held in your chest for years. Behind him, the last note still echoed in people's minds. It hadn't just been a song. It had been a story, a feeling, a memory that didn't need to, belonged to just one person. Everyone who listened had heard something different, yet they all felt the same thing. Something deep, something real. Jonathan stopped near one of the station's wide pillars and looked back at the piano. A boy was now pressing random keys, laughing with his little sister. The magic was gone, but the moment had passed gently, like a wave that touches the shore before returning to the sea. The crowd had mostly dispersed, going back to their lives, yet many were still whispering about the man who played. Some were already checking their phones, searching for videos. One clip had already made it onto social media. A young woman had posted it with the caption, "This man just made me cry in the middle of the train station. Who is he?" "It's Jonathan." Didn't care about the video. He wasn't trying to go viral. He had come to the station to disappear, not to be found. But life had a strange way of pulling people into the light, even when they tried to stay hidden. He moved to a quieter corner of the terminal and sat on a wooden bench. Around him, the world picked up its usual speed again, people rushing to platforms. Announcements cutting through the air, wheels rolling on tile, but inside him, time moved slower. He closed his eyes and leaned back. He could still feel the piano keys under his fingers. His hands remembered every movement, every note. And more than that, he remembered how it made him feel like a boy again, playing not for fame but for freedom. He smiled to himself. For a moment, he didn't feel like a billionaire. He didn't feel like the man who sat at the head of long. Boardroom tables or signed contracts worth millions. Felt like Jonathan from the old neighborhood. The boy who carried bread home in a paper bag, who used broken pencils, who sat in the church late at night playing a piano no one else cared about. But he was also a man who had built an empire. People saw his name in magazines, on donation plaques, and in business headlines. What they didn't see was the part he kept hidden, the weight he carried, the music he missed, the sadness that sometimes crept in during quiet nights. He opened his eyes and noticed a woman sitting a few feet away. She looked around 30, holding a notebook and a coffee cup. She kept looking at him, not in a rude way, just curiously, like she was trying to figure something out. After a few minutes, she got up, walked over, and asked softly, "Excuse me? Sir, were you the one who just played the piano?" Jonathan looked at her and gave a small smile. "Yes," he said. "I just wanted to say." "That was beautiful," she said. "I don't know what song it was, but it made me feel everything." He nodded. "Thank you." "I was having a bad morning," she added. "Then I heard your music, and I don't know. Something shifted." Jonathan didn't know what to say. Praise always felt strange to him, especially now. But her words were honest, simple, and he respected that. "I'm glad it helped," he said gently. She looked like she wanted to ask something else, but instead she smiled and walked away. He watched her blend back into the crowd, disappearing just like he liked to do. Then another person approached. This time a teenager with messy hair and a skateboard. "Dude," he said, "was that like your own song?" Jonathan nodded. "I wrote it a long time ago. That was insane," the boy said. My chest was hurting, but in a good way. "I've never felt that before with a piano," Jonathan chuckled. "Music has a strange way of doing that." The boy grinned and gave him a fist bump before skating off. That was the moment he realized something had shifted, not just in him, but in the air around him. The music he played had opened something in others, and though he never planned to share it, it was now out there in the world, like a secret no longer hidden. A few minutes later, a man in a dark uniform walked toward him. He looked official, maybe security, maybe station staff. Jonathan sat up straighter. The man stopped in front of him and asked, "Sir, was that you on the piano earlier?" Jonathan nodded slowly, unsure of what the tone meant. The man's face softened. "That was the most moving thing I've heard in years. We usually get a lot of noise on that piano, kids banging on it, drunk guys playing the same tune over and over, but what you played silenced the whole floor." "Thank you," Jonathan replied. "I didn't mean to cause a crowd." No, the man said. "You didn't cause trouble. You brought peace. Even some of our staff were crying. We just don't see that kind of thing here, not in a place like this." Jonathan stood up. "I should get going." The man nodded and stepped aside, but before Jonathan left, he said, "Are you a professional? You play like someone who lived through something." Jonathan paused, then replied, "I guess I did." He walked away without saying more as he passed. Through the terminal, more people looked at him now. A few whispered. A girl smiled shyly at him. Someone took a photo, but he didn't stop. He didn't want to be known for this moment. He just wanted to remember it as it was pure. Outside the station, the sky was overcast, but the air felt fresh. Jonathan pulled his coat tighter around him and started walking. He didn't know where he was going, but it didn't matter. Sometimes you don't need a destination. Sometimes you just follow the feeling. While he walked, his phone buzzed. He pulled it from his coat pocket and saw several messages. Some were from his assistant, some from reporters, and one from his niece. "Uncle John, is that you playing? Piano in this video? You're trending." He sighed, amused. Of course the world had found out. He opened one of the video links. It showed him from behind, sitting at the piano. The video zoomed in slowly as he played. The music came through clear. The caption read, "Mysterious man plays piano at Grand Central and brings the whole station to tears." Below were thousands of comments. Some guessed he was a retired musician. Others said he must have lost someone. Few thought he was an angel in disguise. But none of them knew he was Jonathan Rowe, billionaire, investor. and founder of one of the biggest tech companies in the world. He closed the video and slipped the phone back in his pocket as he walked past a small park. He saw a group of kids playing with a soccer ball. One of them was pretending to play the piano on a bench. Jonathan chuckled. The boy's fingers moved wildly, making fake sounds with his mouth. But he had the spirit, the joy. He stood and watched for a minute, then turned and kept walking. He thought about how strange it was, how one act, one song could ripple out like that. He didn't need attention. He didn't want fame. But maybe, sometimes, life used people like him as reminders. Reminders that beauty could still exist in ordinary places. That music could still reach people, no matter who they were. For years, Jonathan had been surrounded by wealth. He had rooms filled with art, cars that cost more than most homes, and staff that handled every small task. But nothing in all of that had ever moved him like this simple moment had. No auction, no deal, no award ever gave him what that out-of-tune piano did today. It reminded him who he really was. He kept walking, hands in his coat pockets, the city moving around him. And though his steps were quiet inside his mind, the music was still playing. Every note a part of him he thought he had forgotten, now found again. After Jonathan left the train station, he walked for hours. He had no plan, no map. The sky had darkened a little, and the wind grew cooler as the afternoon slipped toward evening. He kept his head down, the sound of his shoes blending with the street noises, cars passing, dogs barking, people laughing in the distance. But in his mind, the melody he had played still echoed. He could feel it under his skin. It hadn't left him. Maybe it never would. He bought a cup of black coffee from a small shop, paid in cash, and took a seat outside. He sipped slowly, watching the world go by. It felt good to be unknown, to be just another man with tired eyes and wrinkled clothes. No one asked for his signature. No one tried to impress him. He liked that. He had always liked it even before he was rich. The quiet parts of life, the ones most people skipped, were where he felt most alive. But back inside the train station, his presence had left a mark. Videos of his piano performance had spread quickly online. The first clip had been posted by a teenage girl, and within 2 hours, it had over 1 million views. People didn't just watch, they reacted. Some cried. Some shared it with long captions about healing, pain, and hope. Others asked who the mystery man was. Nobody seemed to know. There were no clear shots of his face, only side views and angles from behind. That only made the internet more curious. Within a day, news outlets picked up the story. A local newspaper ran the headline, "Mystery Musician Moves Hundreds to Tears in Busy Station." It included blurry screenshots and interviews with bystanders. One man had said, "I thought he was homeless. But then he started playing, and suddenly it felt like we were all standing in church holding our breath." Another woman told reporters, "I don't know who he was. I know I'll never forget the way I felt." Back at home, Jonathan's assistant had seen the videos too. She had recognized the coat, the walk, and the way he moved his hands. She didn't confirm anything publicly, but she sent him a message that read, "They're all talking about you. You've started something without even trying." Jonathan didn't respond right away. He wasn't ready. This was something he hadn't expected, attention for something that came from the deepest, most private part of him. He walked to a nearby library and sat in the reading area, where it was quiet. The smell of old books filled the air. It reminded him of childhood. He used to hide in libraries when he was younger, pretending to study but really just avoiding the noise of home. He pulled out his phone and searched his own name. Dozens of articles popped up. Business sites, music blogs, even psychology pages. People were analyzing the melody, guessing the emotion behind it. Some said it was grief. Others said it was forgiveness. A few called it a musical hug for a broken world. Read a comment from someone who wrote, "I haven't felt anything for months. But when I heard this man play, I broke down crying. I didn't even know why. Thank you, whoever you are." Jonathan leaned back in the chair, heart full and confused. He had spent years trying to make the world better through business, investing in clean energy, funding education programs, building health apps. But now, a single song played from a beat-up piano had touched more people than any of those things. And he hadn't planned it. He hadn't even tried. He closed his eyes and thought of his mother. She used to say, "The world doesn't need more noise. It needs more truth." Maybe without meaning to, he had finally shared his truth. The next morning, things changed again. A video was posted by a young man named Carlos. He had been near the station and had taken a clear photo of Jonathan's face after the performance. He didn't know who the man was at the time, but now, after seeing all the news, he realized the truth. The caption said, "That man isn't a street performer. That's Jonathan Rowe, the billionaire. I saw him up close." It was him. The photo spread quickly. Now people were no longer guessing. They were sure. The mystery man was not just a gifted pianist. He was one of the richest men in the country. Reporters went wild. Articles were updated, headlines changed. The story was no longer about a beautiful performance by a stranger. Now it was about a billionaire who sat at a public piano and made people cry. Some were shocked, some were skeptical. A few accused him of doing it for attention. But most people admired it. They said things like, "He could have played in a concert hall, but he chose a dirty station." Or, "That's what makes it powerful. He wasn't looking for anything. He was just being real." Jonathan didn't give interviews. He ignored the calls, spent the day walking by the river, thinking about how quickly something personal had become public. He didn't want the story to be about money. It was never about that. It was about emotion, connection, and that made him feel trapped. Because now everything he had felt in that moment was being turned into headlines and debates. But then something happened that made him stop and think. He received a letter, a handwritten one, mailed to his office. His assistant scanned it and sent him a photo. It was from a woman named Helen. She wrote, "Dear Jonathan, I hope you don't mind me writing. I saw the video of you playing the piano. At first I didn't recognize you, but when I did, I cried. Even harder. Not because you're famous, but because your music reminded me of my son. He died 3 years ago. Used to play just like that, with feeling, with soul. I felt like he was there again, just for a moment, standing beside me. Thank you for giving me that love." Helen * Jonathan stared at the letter for a long time. Then he read it again. He sat down at his desk, one that usually held expensive devices, project plans, and strategy notes, and cleared everything off. He placed the photo of the letter in front of him and just looked at it. For years, he had built towers of success, one after the other, but no tower he had built ever reached his heart like that letter did. He finally replied to his assistant, "Let's talk about setting up something new, a music project, for public spaces, free access, free lessons. Let's use this energy." "For good," she replied quickly. "On it." That night, Jonathan walked back to the same train station. This time, he didn't wear the same coat. He didn't hide his face. He didn't need to. People noticed him now. Yes, a few waved. One or two asked for photos, but most left him alone. He sat on the same piano bench and placed his hands on the keys. He didn't play a full song, just a few notes, slow, thoughtful around him. People started to pause again, but this time, something different happened. A young girl with a violin stepped forward. She had been watching from the side. She looked nervous, but curious. Jonathan smiled and nodded toward the open space beside him. She joined in softly at first, then stronger. Her notes wrapped around his, forming something new, a duet. People began to gather, just like before. But it wasn't a solo performance this time. It was a shared one. Then another person stepped forward, a man with a flute. He joined in, and slowly more came, a woman with a tambourine, a boy tapping rhythms on a plastic bucket. Even a dancer who moved gently beside the music. Jonathan's eyes glistened. He didn't just start a trend. He had opened a door, space where people felt safe to share, feel, and express. Not through words, but through sound. Through movement. Through silence. He let the others play and stepped back. He watched the music take life in others. Watched. It spread like light across the floor. And for the first time in years, Jonathan Rowe, billionaire, businessman, and boy from the broken neighborhood, felt complete. Jonathan felt a strange sense of calm as he walked away from the busy station that day. The piano music he played had touched the hearts of many, and he could still feel the gentle waves of emotion from the crowd. Though he had tried to keep his identity hidden, the world had quickly discovered who he was. Yet he did not regret his choice to play in that public place. For Jonathan, it was a reminder of the simpler times before the wealth, before the power, when music was his true language. The days that followed were full of surprises. The video of his piano playing spread around the world, reaching millions of people who felt moved by the beautiful and honest music. Messages came from strangers who shared their stories, stories of sadness, loss, hope, and healing. Jonathan read each message carefully. They reminded him that music was more than just sound. It was a bridge connecting hearts and souls. Among those messages, one stood out. It was from a small community center in a city not far from where he lived. They asked if Jonathan would help start a free music program for children who couldn't afford lessons. The idea touched something deep inside him. He remembered how music had saved him when he was young, how it had given him hope when the world felt cold and cruel. Jonathan decided to act. He began to work quietly behind the scenes, using his resources to create spaces where music could be shared freely. Community centers, schools, and parks soon received new instruments. Free lessons were offered to children from all backgrounds. Professional musicians volunteered their time to teach, inspired by the story of the undercover billionaire who played a piano in a train station and moved a crowd to tears. This work became Jonathan's new passion. He traveled to visit some of these music programs, watching the faces of children light up as they learned to play their first notes. He saw shy boys and girls find their confidence through music. He listened as families sang together during concerts in the park. Each moment reminded him why he had started this journey, to bring joy and healing to others through the power of music. At the same time, Jonathan continued to live simply. He often returned to the piano in the train station, but now people recognized him. Instead of hiding, he welcomed their smiles and their thanks. Never played for fame or applause, but for connection. The station had become a special place for him, a place where music was not about status or success, but about being human. One evening, after a long day of visiting a music school, Jonathan sat at the piano and played softly. Around him, people stopped and listened, sharing in the moment of calm amid the busy city. A little girl with bright eyes tugged gently at his sleeve and asked if he would teach her to play. He smiled warmly and promised he would. Jonathan knew that the journey he had begun was only starting. Music had the power to heal, to unite, and to inspire. It did not matter how much money one had or how many titles they held. What mattered was the heart behind the music. And his heart, once full of silence, was now overflowing with song. He thought back to the boy he had once been, the boy who sat alone in a church, learning to play on a broken piano. That boy had dreamed of a better life, and now Jonathan was using his success not just to build empires, but to build hope. The music that had saved him was now saving others. In the end, Jonathan's story was not just about a billionaire who played piano in a public place. It was about the power of simple kindness, the strength of sharing one's true self, and the beauty that comes when we listen to the quiet songs inside us all.